You ever have one of those mornings where everything is just still? No noise, no chaos, just a quiet, perfect moment. That was me, standing barefoot in my kitchen, sunlight pouring through the blinds, holding the last warm mug of coffee like it was the Holy Grail. I had nowhere to be, nothing pressing, just peace. And that's when it happened. I glanced out the window just casually, not expecting anything out of the ordinary, and froze mid-sip. On my sidewalk, right outside my house, were 4 people. Standing in a perfect formation, shoulder to shoulder, back straight, like they were about to kick down a door on some low-budget reality show. And at the front of this weird little squad stood someone I knew all too well, Karen. You can tell a Karen from a mile away. It's not just the haircut, it's the attitude. The way she stands like every inch of the neighborhood owes her rent. She wasn't new to this. No, she had trained for this. HOA was her battlefield, and today she brought reinforcements. Matching polo shirts, clipboards clutched like weapons, cheap sunglasses they probably coordinated to look official. They looked like the dollar store version of law enforcement. It would have been hilarious if they weren't standing directly in front of my house, like they were waiting for me to step outside and surrender. I stood there for a second, coffee mug still in hand, trying to figure out if this was a prank. Maybe a flash mob, maybe some kind of weird HOA marketing thing. But no, they weren't smiling. They weren't dancing. They were dead serious. And that's when I realized I knew 2 of the others. Karen's clipboard-carrying sidekick, Carl I think his name was always hanging around, ready to cite people for not edging their lawns properly. The guy looked like he thought cargo shorts were a personality trait. And the other 2? Karen clones. The kind of people who think being a community leader means they get to act like mall cops on a power trip. I watched for another few seconds, then sighed, put down my coffee, and braced myself for whatever nonsense was about to come flying out of her mouth. By the time I opened the front door, Karen was already mid-sentence. Not even a hello, not even a fake smile. "You are in violation of multiple HOA guidelines," she snapped, wagging a perfectly manicured finger in my direction, like she was the judge, jury, and executioner of the block. Her voice had that rehearsed tone, like she'd been practicing this speech in front of her bathroom mirror since 6 a.m. No good morning, no how are you. Just straight into legalese and laminated documents. I hadn't even said a word yet. It was like stepping out of your house and instantly being shoved into a courtroom drama where you're the villain and everyone's already read the script but you. Then Carl stepped forward, like he was her muscle, chest puffed out, clipboard raised like it was an arrest warrant. "You've been given multiple notices," he declared, all dramatic, like he was unveiling some top-secret intel. "You've failed to respond. This is your final warning." Final warning? For what exactly? I asked. I hadn't seen a single flyer, email, phone call, smoke signal, nothing. Karen, of course, didn't miss a beat. She whipped out this laminated HOA citation from, you're gonna love this, a fanny pack. She actually reached into a fanny pack like she was pulling out an arrest warrant from a sacred scroll. "Under the HOA charter," she said, eyes gleaming with self-righteousness, "we are authorized to enact community-level enforcement until these issues are addressed." I took the paper from her and scanned it. My violations were laughable. Wrong shade of garage door, which hadn't changed in 10 years. Unauthorized vehicle in the driveway. My truck, parked exactly where it always is. And the best one? Failure to uphold neighborhood behavior standards. What does that even mean? Did I not wave enough? Was my barbecue not up to HOA flavor expectations? Before I could even respond, Carl reached into his shorts and pulled out a pair of plastic neon orange toy handcuffs. "You can come quietly," he said, visibly trying to deepen his voice. or we will be forced to escort you." I just stared at him, then at Karen, then back at the cuffs. It was like watching children play pretend. But they were adults, and they were serious. Dead serious. I blinked, half expecting Ashton Kutcher to jump out of the bushes and tell me I was being punked. But no, they were really going to try to arrest me. Over a garage door and a truck in the driveway. That's when I realized these people thought they had power. Real power. Like they were some kind of deputized neighborhood force. And that's when I decided it was time to end their little fantasy. I didn't rush it. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise an eyebrow. I just took a slow breath, looked them each in the eye, especially Karen, who was practically vibrating with glee, and then calmly reached around to my back pocket. I pulled out my wallet, flipped it open, and let the sunlight hit the badge inside. County Sheriff. The real deal. Not laminated. Not printed off someone's home office laser printer. Actual law enforcement credentials. And I watched it happen in real time, the shift in their expressions. Karen's smug little smile cracked right down the middle like a dropped ceramic plate. Carl's arm, the one holding the plastic cuffs, dropped to his side like someone had unplugged him. One of the clipboard clones audibly gasped and stepped back. I held the badge just long enough for it to settle in, then spoke, calm as ever. "Good to know you think you can make arrests," I said. "Because right now what you're doing, that's impersonating law enforcement." I let the silence stretch for a beat, the air thick with awkward panic. "And if you actually tried to detain me, that's attempted kidnapping." Karen didn't speak. She opened her mouth, probably trying to come up with a rebuttal, but nothing came out. Carl took a half step back. One of the clones looked like he wanted to teleport out of his shoes. I gave them a warning, not loud, not threatening, just firm. "You've got 5 seconds to walk off my property before this becomes a real problem." They didn't need 5. Carl spun around so fast he nearly tripped over his clipboard. The others followed like scared ducklings. Karen was the last to leave, dragging her feet like a kid who just got grounded. She turned at the edge of my lawn, eyes burning, face red, jaw locked like she was chewing gravel. And just before she turned away, she hissed, "This isn't over." I didn't say anything. Didn't give her the satisfaction of a response. I just turned, walked back into my house, picked up my now cold coffee, and took a long sip. Still bitter, but man, never tasted better. But I should have known better. Because when someone like Karen says, "This isn't over," she means it. That woman could lose every battle and still act like she was winning the war. I didn't see her for the rest of the day, and I thought maybe, just maybe, the badge had scared her enough to back off. But the next morning, I got my answer. I stepped outside, same routine as always, coffee in hand, garbage bag in the other, ready to take the trash out to the bins, only the bins weren't there. I stopped cold, the spot next to my house where the garbage cans always sat, empty, not tipped over, not rolled down the street, gone, vanished. Like a magician had waved a wand and poof, nothing but gravel. At first, I genuinely thought maybe it was some bored teenagers playing a prank. I walked around the side of the house, checked the curb, looked behind the bushes, behind the AC unit, even peeked over the fence. Nothing. I was standing there scratching my head, and that's when I felt it. That tingle on the back of your neck when you know someone's watching. I turned around slowly, and there she was, Karen. Standing across the street on her porch like some smug gargoyle, coffee mug in hand, wrapped in the same bathrobe she probably ironed for intimidation purposes. She didn't say a word, just tilted her head, gave me that slow, self-satisfied nod, and took a sip. No confession necessary. That look said it all. I didn't respond. I refused. She wanted a reaction. That was her thing. She fed off drama. So I just turned back toward the house, only to spot something else out of place. A folded piece of paper taped to my front door, flapping gently in the breeze. I pulled it down and instantly recognized the letterhead. HOA. Of course. I unfolded it and skimmed through, trying to hold in my laugh. Due to continued non-compliance with community standards, your access to waste disposal services has been revoked. Please refrain from placing trash on the curb until further notice. Revoked trash privileges. They actually filed an order banning me from taking out my own garbage. I crumpled the letter in one hand and tossed it, ironically, right onto the patch of gravel where my bins used to be. This wasn't some passive-aggressive Facebook post. This was next-level HOA warfare. And that's when I realized she wasn't just trying to make my life difficult. She was trying to provoke me, trying to wear me down, one absurd power play at a time. I took a breath and reminded myself, this wasn't over, not even close. Karen had declared war, but what she didn't realize was that I had a whole lot more patience than she did. And I also had something she didn't, the law on my side. It was a Thursday afternoon, one of those perfectly normal days where everything seems to be going right. I had just pulled into my driveway after work, engine still humming, thinking about what to make for dinner when I saw it. Bright orange, right in the center of my driveway. At first, I thought maybe one of the neighbor kids had left a toy out, or some utility company had come by for a quick inspection. But then I got closer and saw what it really was, a traffic cone. Not just randomly placed either. It was centered with surgical precision, like it was marking a hazard. But there was no hazard, no cracks in the concrete, no oil spill. Just my clean driveway, with an obnoxious plastic cone standing proudly like it owned the place. And right next to it, a wooden stake driven into the ground, zip-tied with, you guessed it, another laminated HOA sign. This one read, Garage access revoked by order of the HOA. I actually had to read it twice because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Revoked garage access. Who even thinks to write that? Was there a garage door license I didn't know about? Did I miss a DMV appointment for my own property? I stood there for a second, just trying to wrap my head around it. And of course, I didn't even need to look to know who was behind this. But I looked anyway. Across the street, like clockwork, was Karen. Same crossed arms, same smug little grin, like she'd just won a chess game against herself. I bent down, grabbed the laminated sign, ripped it clean off the stake, and tossed it onto my lawn. Then I gave the cone a gentle nudge, rolling it toward the curb like I was sending it home for a timeout. I didn't throw it. I didn't yell. Just a nice little flick that said, "Not today." And I swear to you, the moment that cone stopped rolling, they emerged, like cockroaches from behind a fridge when the lights go out. Karen's clipboard cronies popped out from behind a bush near her driveway, waddling over like they were summoned. One had a notepad, the other a pen, and they both immediately started scribbling. I watched them for a second, genuinely amazed. It was like watching squirrels take inventory. I crossed my arms and asked, "What exactly are you recording?" The one with the pen glanced up nervously and muttered, "Homeowner removed official HOA notification without approval." I blinked. In my driveway. The two of them froze like they just realized they'd left the stove on. They exchanged looks, then looked over at Karen, who was now standing at the edge of her lawn like she was about to deliver a closing argument in court. "That was an official sanction," she shrieked, pointing at the now rolled-away cone. "You're in violation of HOA code." "Which one?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Code 4, she shot back without hesitation. "Violation of garage access restrictions and hostile conduct toward community leadership." I had to take a deep breath, rub my temples just to process how absurd this entire exchange was. "Karen," I said slowly, "you can't just make up rules and enforce them like you're running your own HOA police department." She sniffed, and with the kind of confidence only delusion can provide, replied, "Actually, I can. The HOA fully supports my decisions." That's when I really had to bite my tongue, because this wasn't just about cones and signs anymore. It was about power. She wanted control. She wanted to provoke a reaction so she could twist it into justification for whatever made-up penalty she was itching to slap on me next. "Karen," I said, trying to keep it civil, "this isn't a gated community. The HOA doesn't own my property. You don't pay my mortgage. You don't have the right to decide who uses their garage or where someone parks their truck." Her face turned a color somewhere between embarrassment and rage, like a tomato that had been insulted. I gave her one final look, turned around, and walked inside. Closed the door behind me. End of conversation, for now. But the woman was relentless, predictable, but relentless. And sure enough, just a couple days later, it escalated. I got a phone call from my neighbor Marcus. Chill guy, super quiet, doesn't get involved in anything. So when he called me, I knew something was up. "You need to get home," he said, voice low. "Right now." "Why? What's going on?" "There are cops outside your house, 2 cruisers, and Karen's talking to them." I didn't even say goodbye, just grabbed my keys and bolted. I turned the corner onto my street, and there they were. 2 police cars parked directly in front of my house, lights flashing, and Karen standing between them, putting on what had to be the most dramatic performance of her life. One hand clutching her chest like she was on the verge of fainting, the other waving wildly toward my property. She looked like she was auditioning for a soap opera. I pulled up, parked, and stepped out. One of the officers, Ryan, was someone I actually knew. We'd worked a few cases together in the past. Good guy, solid judgment. He looked at me, then looked at Karen, and I could already see it on his face. He was over it. He walked over, gave me a small nod and said, "Boss, we got a call about suspicious activity. Something about a possible firearm. Dangerous behavior. Aggression." I stared at him. "Let me guess. Karen." He didn't even need to answer. Behind me, she gasped like she'd been personally attacked. "I only reported what I heard. Some neighbors were concerned." Ryan just sighed. "You got anything we need to worry about? Other than a woman who thinks she can run a neighborhood like a dictatorship? Number?" He nodded. "That's what I figured." I turned toward Karen and took a step closer, dropping my voice. "You realize making false police reports is a crime, right? That's not just HOA drama. That's real-world legal trouble. And impersonating law enforcement, that's another one." Her mouth opened, then closed again. Nothing came out. Her performance had ended, and the curtain had dropped. Ryan stepped in, arms crossed. "Ma'am, unless you've got actual evidence of a threat or a legitimate concern, we're going to have to ask you to stop wasting our time and resources." Karen looked around for support that wasn't there. Even her clipboard brigade was nowhere in sight. She turned, muttering something about not being respected, and stomped off toward her house. Ryan gave me a look like, "Sorry you've got to deal with that," and the officers packed up and left. As I stood there on my porch, watching Karen peek through her blinds like a cartoon villain, it hit me. This wasn't just about one petty neighbor or some made-up violations. This was about principle, about standing up to someone who thought intimidation could replace authority. She wasn't just picking a fight with me anymore. She was challenging the line between neighborhood rules and actual law, and she had no idea who she was messing with. 3 days. That's how long it took for her to regroup. 3 days of silence. No cones, no notes, no passive-aggressive shouting from across the street. and for a minute, I actually believed it. I thought maybe the badge, the cops, the failed accusations, it had finally been enough. Maybe Karen was embarrassed. Maybe, just maybe, she'd retreated, tail tucked, ready to lick her wounds and leave me alone. But Karen doesn't retreat. Karen reloads. It started early in the morning, a low rumble that shook the windows. I was still half asleep, still in my flannel pajama pants and an old hoodie, coffee mug in hand, staring at my front lawn with one eye open. And then the sound got louder. Diesel engines, brakes hissing, doors slamming. I stepped outside just in time to see a full construction crew pulling up in front of my house. 2 massive work trucks, one towing a mini excavator, and a third truck loaded with tools and cones. Men in reflective vests jumped out, chatting casually, sipping their coffees, stretching like they were getting ready to build a skyscraper. For a second, I honestly thought they had the wrong house, some kind of utility job or city repair project. But then I saw the cones. Dozens of them, bright orange and arranged methodically along my driveway and curb like they were preparing for a demolition. I stood frozen, completely dumbfounded, until one of the crew members, a guy in his 40s with a clipboard and hard hat, walked up and said cheerfully, "Morning. We're here to start excavation and emergency pipe repair. Big one under this property. Might be affecting the whole street if we don't get to it." I blinked. "Excavation?" He nodded. "Yep. Emergency request came through last night. HOA flagged it as a critical issue. Something about foundational instability caused by a broken main. Could compromise the street." I asked to see the paperwork. And there it was, plain as day. HOA seal. Emergency work order. Signed at the bottom in big dramatic letters. Karen Thompson, HOA president. She hadn't just filed a complaint this time. She had filed a full-on emergency repair order to dig up my lawn. No inspection, no notice, just straight to demolition. I looked up, and sure enough, she was there, across the street. Standing on her porch like a general watching the battlefield, coffee mug in hand, "World's Best HOA President," written across it in cheesy gold lettering. She was sipping slowly, watching like she'd summoned these men from the underworld. She smiled. Actually smiled. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about rules or order or even revenge anymore. This was about control. And if she couldn't control me, she'd destroy the ground I stood on. So I walked back over to the guy with the clipboard and said, "You're not starting anything. Not here." He gave me a confused look. "Sir, this is an approved work order. We're just following protocol." I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my badge. Held it up so there was no confusion. "I'm the sheriff," I said calmly. "And I'm telling you right now, there is no emergency. There is no leak. And unless you want to be held personally liable for any damage to this property, you and your crew need to back off immediately." The color drained from his face. He looked around at the other workers, who had now paused mid-unload, unsure if they should start digging or run for the hills. He gave a quick whistle, waved his arms. "All right, guys, pack it up, cancel it, let's go." The whole operation stopped in under 2 minutes. They rolled up the cones, reloaded the excavator, and peeled out one truck at a time. Karen, now realizing her master plan was unraveling in real time, actually came running across the street in those ridiculous wedge heels she always wore for HOA meetings. "You can't do this," she yelled, eyes wide, voice shaking. "This repair was authorized." "No," I said. "This repair was fraudulently filed by you. There's no inspection, no leak. You made it up, and you forged a request to tear apart someone's property. That's a crime, Karen." She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Just that wide-eyed panic and the twitch she gets in her right eye when she's trying to think faster than she can speak. I lowered my voice and leaned in slightly. "Start thinking real hard about your next move, because this just crossed the line." She stood there, frozen. Then, without a word, she spun around and stormed back to her house. No victory speech, no fake citation, just angry footsteps and the slamming of her front door. I figured that had to be the end. How many fake reports, false accusations, staged operations can one person pull off before they hit the wall? Apparently, Karen had one last bullet in the chamber, because 3 days later, I got a letter in the mail. Crisp white envelope. HOA logo stamped neatly in the top left. Looked official. Too official. I opened it right there on the porch, half expecting more nonsense about my grass length or another demand to repaint my garage door. But this time, she'd gone bigger. Much bigger. The letter stated, in carefully worded paragraphs, that due to my ongoing hostility toward HOA leadership and failure to uphold community values, the HOA had voted to revoke my resident privileges. That's right. According to this letter, I was no longer welcome to live in my own home. The home that I own. The one I pay taxes on. They were trying to evict me. I stood there in the sunlight, holding the letter, absolutely stunned. I wasn't just being harassed anymore. Karen had turned this into a campaign to physically remove me from my property. So I did what any rational person would do. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't even go over there. I waited for the date listed on the letter, the disciplinary review hearing, scheduled for that Thursday night at the community center. And I showed up early, walked in, calm and collected, took a seat right at the front. The room was packed. Folding chairs lined every wall. Neighbors from all sides of the community had come. Some were curious, some were visibly annoyed to be there, but all of them were watching. And there she was, front and center behind a long plastic table, gavel in hand, nameplate in front of her like she was some federal judge. Karen Thompson, HOA president. Her papers were stacked like she was about to prosecute a major case. She cleared her throat like this was a courtroom. We are here today to address the repeated violations of one of our residents, whose behavior has threatened the peace and harmony of this neighborhood, she began. Her tone was dripping with self-importance. I leaned back in my seat, arms crossed, ready to watch her crash and burn. She listed off the infractions, like she was reading from a scroll. Refusal to comply with garage door standards, unauthorized vehicle in the driveway, tampering with enforcement tools, public intimidation of HOA officials. I raised a hand. Tampering with enforcement tools? You mean the traffic cone? She sniffed. It was placed under full HOA authority. I shook my head. Karen, let me make this simple. You don't have the authority to remove me from my home. You don't own it. You don't pay for it. And this HOA isn't a government. It's a Facebook page with delusions of grandeur. That's when the tide turned. One of the board members leaned forward and said quietly, technically, he's right. Karen whipped her head toward him. Excuse me? He cleared his throat. There hasn't been a formal vote for president in years. The bylaws require one annually. That was the moment. That was when the dam broke. A woman from the third row stood up and asked, "Wait, are you saying Karen was never elected?" Another board member admitted it. Not officially. Karen's face flushed with the rage of 1,000 suns. But the damage was done. People started murmuring, some started laughing, and the whole illusion she'd built over the years collapsed under the weight of her ego. I stood up, met her gaze, and said, loud and clear, "This little fantasy is over." And for once, she had no words. Because it was. Over. Or, at least, it should have been. But Karen, she still had one more trick up her sleeve. One last desperate grasp for power. What she didn't realize, though, was that by this point, it wasn't just me standing up to her anymore. The entire neighborhood was watching. And this time, she wasn't going to walk away clean. Just when I thought the storm had passed, just when I started to breathe normally again, thinking Karen had finally run out of energy, out of ideas, out of ammo, there came the sirens. Not the distant ones you ignore, not the kind that fade into the background. These were close, loud, immediate. The kind that pull your gut straight to the floor, before your brain even catches up. I bolted upright, threw on the nearest pair of shoes, and walked outside, half expecting to see a car crash or a house fire. Instead, I found 2 county code enforcement vehicles parked right in front of my property, hazard lights blinking. 2 officers already out and flipping through thick folders of paperwork, like they were preparing for a raid. They weren't police, no badges, no guns. But they had uniforms, clipboards, utility belts, official patches. The kind of guys you don't see unless someone's filed a serious complaint. The older one, glasses and a no-nonsense look, walked up to me and said, "Sir, are you the homeowner?" I gave him a long look. "If I'm not," I said. "I'm really confused about why I'm standing on this porch in boxers and boots." He didn't crack a smile. "We received a formal complaint from your HOA about multiple code violations on this property. We're here for an emergency inspection." I couldn't help but laugh. I had seen this play before. "Let me guess," I said. "Karen sent you." He didn't answer, just flipped the top sheet and started listing off the accusations. Unauthorized structural modifications, illegal plumbing alterations, suspected pest infestation, and a potential electrical hazard in the garage. I stared at him. "You're kidding." "No, sir. Emergency complaints require immediate inspection by protocol. If there's nothing wrong, we'll be out of your hair quickly." I didn't even bother looking across the street. I already knew she was there. But I turned anyway. And of course there she stood, on her porch, arms folded, grinning. Not just watching, savoring every second. She gave me a slow wave, then gasped dramatically and said, loud enough for the officers to hear, "I told you something was off about that place. It's a safety risk." I turned back to the inspectors. "Go ahead," I said. "You'll want to see this with your own eyes. And I want this all on record." So they began the most thorough inspection of my home I'd ever witnessed. They went room to room, wall to wall, checking every outlet, flipping every switch, poking into crawl spaces I didn't even know existed. One of them spent 20 full minutes crawling around under the house looking for rodents. I offered him a sandwich when he came back out, covered in dust and looking annoyed. They checked my foundation, measured moisture in the walls, pulled off the cover to my breaker box and studied it like it held national secrets. And through it all, Karen never went back inside. She stood out there like she was hosting a parade, sipped her coffee, smiled every time they frowned, lit up like a Christmas tree every time a clipboard came out. You could see it on her face. She already thought she'd won. She was probably imagining her name in the local paper. Hero HOA leader saves neighborhood from shoddy construction. 2 hours later, both inspectors were back in my driveway. The one with glasses cleared his throat. "Sir, we've completed a full inspection. Your property is fully compliant, no violations. Everything's up to code." I smiled. "So, just to be clear, the complaint was..." "Completely false," he confirmed. "And we'll be documenting that in the official report." "Good," I said, "because I'd like it noted that someone filed a fraudulent emergency complaint as a harassment tactic. That's a crime, isn't it?" The second inspector, younger guy, nodded. "Multiple false complaints from the same source can result in legal consequences. We've seen it before." I didn't need to say anything. I just turned, looked across the street, and raised my voice slightly. "Did you hear that, Karen? Multiple false reports could lead to legal action." She froze. Her hand stopped halfway to her coffee mug. The grin faded. For the first time in weeks, she didn't have a reply. The officers packed up their gear, nodded to me and drove off. Karen didn't move. She stood there like someone had unplugged her, and I thought maybe, that would finally be it. That the humiliation would be enough to stop her. But the universe had other plans, because apparently, my formal complaint about the fake emergency work order, plus this code enforcement stunt, finally triggered something bigger, something official. Less than a week later, without warning, a county auditor showed up in our neighborhood. No announcements, no fanfare. Just a guy in a button-up with a clipboard and a badge, going door to door asking quiet questions about HOA spending, resident fines, and community votes. That's when things really began to unravel. It turns out Karen hadn't just been power tripping, she'd been embezzling, misusing funds, pocketing fines, charging neighbors for bogus infractions, like mailbox height or fence color, and then never reporting the payments. Over $30,000 collected through fees and violations, with no paper trail, no receipts, no improvement projects. Just upgrades to her own home, new patio furniture, custom landscaping, private cleaners, even solar panels installed at HOA negotiated prices, but only for her house. And the best part? She was never legally HOA president to begin with. According to the bylaws, there had to be an election every year. She hadn't held one in 6. Just declared herself queen and dared anyone to challenge her. No votes, no meetings. Just Karen signing everything herself, building her own little empire one laminated sign at a time. When the audit results went public, the reaction was immediate. Neighbors who had never said a word suddenly had stories to share. Letters, photos, screenshots of threatening emails, unfair fines, threats of property liens, people who'd paid hundreds of dollars just to avoid her wrath. It was like a volcano finally erupted, and everyone she'd silenced for years came pouring out of the woodwork. An emergency HOA meeting was scheduled, and this time it was an emergency. No banners, no donuts, no decorations, just folding chairs, a table at the front, and Karen, no longer presiding, sitting dead center, surrounded by a board that had finally realized they were sinking with her. She wasn't smiling now, she wasn't talking. Her stack of papers looked thinner. Her nameplate looked pathetic. The air in the room was different. Every accusation was read aloud. Every receipt she failed to produce. Every signature she forged. Every lie, every threat, every dollar that went unaccounted for. She tried to speak. They shut her down. "You had your chance," someone said. "Let the numbers speak for themselves." The vote was unanimous. She was stripped of her position. The entire board was dissolved. A full legal investigation was launched. And then, just as she began to gather her things, thinking maybe she could quietly disappear, 2 detectives walked in through the back door. Not HOA security, not code enforcement. Detectives. Karen bolted, didn't even grab her purse, just stood up and ran like she thought she could sprint her way out of justice. She made it maybe 15 feet before one detective calmly stepped in front of her and the other clicked handcuffs. Real ones, not plastic orange toys, around her wrists. She screamed, cried, claimed harassment, said it was all a misunderstanding. But no one moved to help her. No one spoke up. In fact, someone in the crowd started clapping, then someone else. And then the whole room joined in. She was marched out of that community center, red-faced, sputtering, and humiliated in front of the very people she had bullied, threatened, and deceived for years. Her house went up for sale a month later, sat on the market forever. No one wanted it. Not because of the structure, because of the reputation. It reeked of her. Eventually, she moved out of town. Rumor has it she found another HOA somewhere else. A new batch of neighbors, a fresh Facebook group to conquer. But here, things changed. The HOA was rebuilt, with actual elections, real structure, fair rules. The ridiculous fines disappeared. The dumb cones and signs vanished. And for the first time in years, people actually talked to each other like neighbors again. But the best part, the for sale sign in Karen's front yard. It wasn't just a listing. It was a symbol, a monument to the day the neighborhood took back its peace. And every time I walked past it, I smiled. Not because I won, but because she lost. And she did it all to herself.